Hi everybody, welcome to Wellness Wednesday. We have a really fun topic for you guys today, and it's something that a lot of people actually ask us questions about, and it has to do with baking at altitude and how do we get food to turn out at altitude, because we have a lot of factors involved up here. So the main thing that kind of hinders baking at altitude has to do with the air density. So when we're thinking sea level, all of the air molecules are really dense and they're really close together. The higher up you go in altitude, the farther apart those air molecules become, which then changes the way that the air pressure affects things that rise. So I'm gonna come around the side. You're not gonna be able to see me for a moment, but we do have some interesting information for you guys here on our little whiteboard. All of this information is going to be linked in the comment section of the Instagram once it gets posted. So if there's anything that you guys need to revisit, look at a little bit more closely, it's all going to be there for you. So the first thing I'd like to talk to you guys about is the way that we scale our ingredients for baking. I have a very basic vanilla cake recipe up here. Again, there's a lot of jumbled numbers on the board, and I'll explain what all of these mean in just a few minutes. I'm also going to demonstrate how to get the best result out of your cake recipe once you've done all of your conversions. So the best way that, if you're going to be baking anything, the best way you can possibly do this is by weighing your ingredients as opposed to measuring your ingredients. And there's a reason for this. So if you think of the density of flour versus the density of brown sugar, there's a pretty distinct difference in the way those two are weighed. So we usually go by weight in the bake shop, and it just makes things a lot more accurate. You're gonna have a lot better results when things come out of the oven because they're going to be properly scaled. Now down here, if you don't use a recipe that goes by weight, that's okay. I'm gonna include here a chart that can help you convert scaled ingredients to weighed ingredients. So the first one on here talks about all-purpose flour, cake flour, self-rising. It's going to tell you exactly what that should weigh if you use a cup versus grams. And then you're going to end up being able to convert your recipes a lot easier, and your product's going to turn out a lot differently because it is weighed as opposed to just measured. There can also be air pockets, or we mismeasure, something along those lines. When we scale things and when we use a baker scale or just any other scale, it's going to be so much more accurate that your product will turn out a whole lot better every time. So baker's percentage is kind of an interesting concept. If you don't know what this means, that's okay. It's not something that's used very often. A lot of times we just see it in professional bake shops, but I would recommend learning about it because, again, if you're an avid home baker and you're struggling with altitude, knowing how to do this is going to end up, again, your product is going to be a little bit more accurate because you're going to know exactly what each item should weigh. So if you look up a recipe that involves the baker's percentage, everything, you're going to have one column that has all of your ingredients, and then the next column is going to have a weight, and then the next column is going to have a percentage. So the percentage that we're going off of, flour equals 100%, no matter what. So if you have multiple different flours, if you're making bread, those two together, say we're using rye and all-purpose, or rye and bread flour. If we mix those two together, whatever the weights of those two are, that equals 100% in my recipe. Everything else from there is a percentage of that weight. So if I have a pound of flour, okay, so 16 ounces of flour, and I need, let's say the recipe calls for 50% sugar. So I'm going to have 16 ounces of flour, multiply that by 50%, it's going to give me 8 ounces, and that's how much sugar I'm going to use, and so on and so forth. You go down the list. Once you know, okay, my flour is a pound, and then I know all of the percentages after that, everything is a percentage of that 100% of that 16 ounces. Hopefully that makes sense. It's just a little snippet into what that means. Again, we can revisit this another time. If you have questions about what this means, just send me a message. I would be happy to explain it to you. And yeah, so again, if you use this percentage, you're going to end up with really, really accurate numbers. If you don't use baker's percentage, but you'd like to start weighing those, use this chart. And then we're going to dive right into the high altitude baking percentage exchange. So what this means is when we rise up in altitude, again, air density changes. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of factors that change, especially for up here. We have a really dry climate. Some days we have a really wet climate, it just depends, but that is also going to affect the way that you adjust your recipes. So if you can see on here, it's got multiple different altitudes that you adjust to, because again, the more we go up, the further away those air molecules expand, the less air density we have, the less air pressure we have. So our rising agent, so that would be our baking sodas, baking powders, yeast, anything that causes your cake or your baked good to rise, that's what we are going to decrease. This is one of the major things if you find, if you bake a cake and your cake kind of explodes in the pan. I think we've all been there. There are multiple reasons why this could happen, and one of the main ones is we have too much of our leavening agents in there. So we're going to decrease this, and again, at 2,500 feet, it goes down by 20%. At 5,000 feet, it goes down by 40%. At 6,500 feet, it goes down by 50%. And up where we are above 7,500 feet. We are going to decrease that number by 60%. And that seems like a lot, but again, without that pressure pushing down on the top of my cake, that's going to expand more. So the more I have, the more expansion I get. We don't need that necessarily. All right, so flour. We do need more flour, again, because of that expansion and things dehydrating. There's a lot of factors into the reason why we need more flour, but the main point is we need more protein. So the protein being in our baked good, it's going to coagulate, and that's what gives us our actual product. So once those proteins start to stick together, once they've been exposed to moisture and heat, then they start to solidify and kind of stick together. And again, that gives us our end product. We don't have enough of that. There's not enough protein to counteract all of these other ingredients. And then we end up with a broken product. All right, going down the list, eggs. Eggs they're considered one of our liquids. However, they also have a large protein content. So these we also need to increase because it's going to increase our moisture, which again, up at altitude, it's going to evaporate faster. We're going to lose moisture very quickly, and we need more protein in order to hold the product together. So again, going down the list, we increase, we're just going to go for what we are at 7,500 feet. Again, if you need to reference this, if you live at a different altitude, that's okay. Again, this will be accessible to you in the comments. But at 7,500 feet, we need to increase our eggs by 15%. Again, we need that protein and we need that moisture. Okay, sugar. So sugar is another one. If you have too much sugar, you have too much leavener, or you have too much fat, your product is not going to turn out well. This is another one of the reasons why our products kind of expand to a point where they overflow. Once sugar hits a certain temperature, it starts to bubble, it starts to turn into a syrup and a candy. The molecules of the carbohydrates change, and it ends up expanding as well. And in order to combat that, we need to decrease our sugar. So at 7,500 or above, we are decreasing by 9%. Okay, fat is the same thing. We decrease by 9%. The way that the fat reacts with the sugars and the proteins, it creates a really interesting, this is a science experiment really. And in order to keep the proteins happy and allow them to do their jobs, we need to take that down a little bit. So 9% decrease on our fat. And then our liquid, again, we've kind of talked about why we need to increase our liquid when we talked about eggs. With the air density being a little bit different, evaporation happens very quickly, especially on a dry, hot day during the summertime. We are going to need to increase that moisture. You'll actually, once you're up here and you start baking a lot, this is something I've noticed when making bread doughs. If it's based off of the air pressure system that's moving through the valley at the time, you're going to need to adjust your moisture content even more, just based off of what the weather's doing. And again, the more you bake, the more you learn these things, and you'll figure it out from there. So we are going to increase our moisture by 22% to counteract the evaporation that happens at altitude. So these are kind of the guidelines that if you know kind of what you're working with. If you have a recipe that's been tested at sea level or anywhere between sea level and 2,500 feet, I recommend you use these ratios, and it's going to help you have your product turn out a little bit better. So as you can see, again, we talked about this a few minutes ago. This is the vanilla cake recipe that I'm going to kind of give you guys some tips on today. These are just the base ingredients. Okay. So we have this first number, again, it's kind of jumbled, but this is the original recipe. This is before it has been adjusted for altitude. So 1 1/3 cup. I recommend you convert this to grams. It, again, is going to be the easiest way to get the numbers you're looking for. If I try to do 9% off of 1 1/3 cup, it's going to be a little bit of a different math problem than if I just multiply that by 185 grams. So I'm going to convert all of my stuff, and I can include a conversion chart for you guys to help you with your math projects. If we are going from ounces to grams, 28 grams per ounce is how we do that conversion. And I'll include a conversion chart in with all of these other pieces of information. So I've converted my 1 1/3 cup to 185 grams. Okay. 185 grams times 109% because I'm increasing. So this is 100% of the original. I'm increasing by 9%. 1.09 gives me 201.6 grams. That's my new number for flour. That's my new weight. So that's where I'll go for that. And we're gonna just do a couple of these and you'll get the idea. I've already converted my recipe for when we go over here. Baking powder, so this is the interesting one. It seems like a massive reduction in number. So if I have 1 teaspoon, that is roughly 4.6 grams. Now I'm going to decrease that number by 60%. So I'm gonna take this, if this is my 100, I'm going to subtract the 60%, so that gives me 40%, 0.4. This number times 0.4 gives me 1.84 grams. Okay, so I've done this all the way down. I've followed this guideline all the way down. So now I have my converted recipe. I'm ready to weigh my ingredients and I'm ready to begin my project. All right, so I'm gonna move this out of the way and we're gonna talk about some tips in order to make your product turn out the best it possibly can. Okay, so after doing all of that math and a little break because my brain got tired, I am now going to start with the best possible method for just a basic vanilla cake. And that method is called the creaming method. Especially if I'm using butter and sugar, we want to get those aerated. And there's a couple of reasons why we want to do that. So I'm going to add my butter into the bowl along with my scaled out sugar. So again, everything here has been weighed, so it is as accurate as it possibly can be. So butter and sugar go into the bowl first, and then we blend this. Now I recommend you blend it for at least 2 minutes. What we're doing is we are going to aerate the butter, so we're going to incorporate air, and we're going to spread out the molecules of the butter and the sugar so that they're evenly distributed throughout the cake. So it's going to be loud for just a minute. Shooting butter everywhere. Alright, so I'm going to save you guys from having to watch me mix this for 2 minutes, but you get the idea. The more that I mix this, the more aeration I have, the better the reaction for my leavening agent. And even if I have a leavening agent that's off, I've now included another one. So I now don't only have baking powder, sodium bicarbonate. When it's combined with liquid, it rises. But now I've also got aeration. So I've got 2 components for a leavened cake. It's going to give me better crumb. I'm not going to get a lot of tunneling, which is those little holes in your cake. And it's just going to end up with a better result. Now I'm going to add my eggs. So I've got my butter and my sugar already mixed together and aerated. I've got my eggs. Now I recommend, this is a secret of the trade, how many people have cracked an egg into something and some shell ends up in there? I'm guilty of it myself if I'm rushing. So I recommend you take a small dish and crack each egg individually, because again, there's other things that happen too. You've got sediment, you've got a bad egg, you've got some blood in there. It does happen sometimes, but if you end up putting all of that into your butter and your sugar, then you've just wasted that product because it now becomes contaminated. So once we've got these mixed, we're gonna add our eggs one at a time and make sure they are fully incorporated, and then continue to mix these for about 2 more minutes. Well incorporated. Now another really important piece of this, especially when we're baking at altitude, because we have so many variables that could affect our end result, you need to scrape down the bowl after everything you add. Every addition, the bowl gets scraped. If I'm making cupcakes, for example, the very last cupcake I make usually ends up turning out kind of weird if I don't scrape the bowl, because I have uneven amounts of butter, sugar, or leavening agent in the bottom of the bowl because I didn't do my job and remove those from the bottom of the bowl. We want to make sure that everything is fully incorporated. All right, so the next step, again, this recipe is relatively basic. I have my flour, which has been sifted. Sifting is important. It does, it breaks apart the particles. It creates better even distribution of the particles of flour into your ingredients. So again, you get better crumb, you don't have any lumps. We don't want to have that happen. So when I have my flour, I'm going to add my baking powder. And I'm going to add my salt in with my flour. And I'm going to combine these. Now again, this is going to help with even distribution of the baking powder and the salt into the flour so that I don't get one piece of part of my cake that has more baking soda than another piece, or baking powder than another part. And now I have my vanilla, which I am going to add in with my milk. You can also add it in with the eggs. It's up to you. It's up to you on your preference. I personally, if there's a vanilla extract that has an alcohol base to it, I actually like adding that to my milk because it sours the milk a little bit and it adds a really dynamic flavor. So we've got everything ready for the next stages. So when we're doing the creaming method, this is technically called the 2-stage creaming method. I've got all of my ingredients creamed and ready for the next stage. Now I'm going to add 1/3 of my flour, get that fully incorporated, scrape down the bowl. Give it a good scrape, get all of that stuff incorporated in. And now I'm going to add 1/3 of my milk. And I'm going to continue this process until all of the ingredients have been fully incorporated. Again, scraping down the bowl, we want to make sure everything gets fully incorporated. We don't want to leave anything out. We don't want to throw off our ratios. Again, we worked so hard on all of our math to make sure that our ratios are correct, that we don't want to mess that up by not scraping the bowl properly. All right, so this is my last little bit. And from here, once everything has been fully incorporated, I'm going to make sure that it's really well mixed. And then again, make sure that my bowl has been scraped thoroughly. One more mix. And then I'm going to put these in a prepared pan into the oven at 350 degrees for roughly 18 to 22 minutes, depending on the heat of my oven depending on the temperature of the day. And there are a lot of different factors that come into play when we talk about the heat of our oven. We'll touch on this briefly. We can, again, if you have any questions for me on why we do this, I'm happy to answer them for you. So when we put this into the oven at 350 degrees, that's usually the base temperature. A lot of people like to increase the temperature of their oven at altitude because it helps the proteins that are in the egg and in the flour coagulate faster, which is going to keep the rise under control. So again, if I accidentally overdid it on my baking powder, and I get the proteins to coagulate and trap the air, it's going to keep it from over rising. Or the other theory there is if you drop the temperature of your oven by about 15 degrees, you're not going to get the evaporation and you're going to end up with a less dry product. So those are my tips for you guys on high altitude baking, and I hope that it helped. And please, again, if you have any questions about any of this, just reach out. I am happy to answer any questions you have. We are now going to go into a healthy dessert with Shawn. He has made a beautiful vegan banana avocado chocolate mousse for you guys.
All right. Hello. How's everyone doing? We decided we'd go quick and easy on a dessert and a recipe for you guys today, in case everyone's brain's fried with math and science.
Sorry.
So what we did here was we made a banana avocado chocolate mousse, and we kind of turned it into a little parfait, as you can see here. Very simple. This is a raw vegan dessert, so there's no baking involved, and there's, for the most part, should be pretty easy. So the recipe will be in the comments as well, but just to go through it real quick, for a 4-person serving, you're going to look for 4 bananas, 2 avocados, half a cup of cocoa powder, 2 teaspoons of vanilla, 1 teaspoon of salt, and about a 1/4 cup of either agave nectar or honey. If you're really looking for a true vegan product, honey's not the way to go, agave, or if you don't have any agave, you can always use maple syrup as another inverted sugar sweetener. So the process for this, without lugging too much equipment up here, is you are going to use a blender, a food processor, or a RoboCoupe of sorts, whatever you have at home, and we are going to peel the avocado and pit it. We are going to peel the banana and slice it. Place both of those into your food processor or blender. Add your honey and your salt, and then we're going to blend everything up. So basically we're going to blend everything together except for the cocoa powder. And then once it's all smooth, we are then going to remove about 1/3 of it. So you'll have this nice green banana avocado mousse here. We're going to remove 1/3 of it, put it into a piping bag or something. You can use a Ziploc bag if you don't have one at home. Anything to seal off the mixture from air. We don't want it to oxidize and turn brown. It's going to ruin the presentation and the nice color. The remaining, we are going to then add the cocoa powder and blend it till smooth. So basically it's the same mousse except for some of it is flavored with cocoa, the other is just the banana and avocado. So, touching on that, we have our empty glass here. We always want to use the chocolate on the bottom and the top. Once again, the reason for this is the avocados will oxidize, turn brown, and presentation won't be quite as nice. So when you're piping, you always grab from the back of the bag and squeeze. And I kind of try to follow the rim of the glass and get my edges first, and then fill in the center so it's a nice, even layer. And then we'll take the green avocado and repeat. Piping from the back, filling in the center. You can always give your glass a nice little tap on the table to level it back out if you need. And then we're gonna finish it back off with more of the chocolate. And then you can kind of garnish however you see fit. We used some little cereal cocoa crusted rice balls. You can brulee some slices of banana or just use fresh banana on top. Or a little dusting of powdered sugar is nice. So once again, once you're at this stage, you get it all piped in. It takes about an hour in the fridge to set up, and then you're ready to serve.
Perfect. Thank you, Shawn.
Absolutely.
All right. So I'm going to come join you over here. Again, we always end our day with some quick fire word association, and I'm going to put Shawn on the spot today. Yes. Yes, good time. Okay, your first one, based off of what we've talked about today, your first one is sugar.
Sweetener and my addiction.
Perfect. There we go. Okay, baking.
Baking, biscuits. I don't know why I think of biscuits and baking, but I love
they
biscuits.
They are a baked product, right? Snacks.
Snacks. Healthy fruit, gluten-free.
Perfect. Dessert.
Dessert. Parfait. Mousse.
Wonderful. And then this one's actually going to lead us into next week. Eggs.
Eggs. Omelet.
Perfect. All right. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. Again, if you have any questions for either one of us about anything food related, we are happy to answer your questions. And then we will see you back here next week. We're going to do a little bit more science with eggs. And we're going to teach you a couple of different applications and a few different ways to use eggs in your cooking.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
See you next week.